The uncomfortable truth about men is not that they are dangerous. It is that they are predictable. Not predictable in the way people assume. Not because they're simple. Not because they lack intelligence. And certainly not because they lack desire. Men become predictable for a far more unsettling reason. They believe they are hiding their intentions. And nothing reveals a human being faster than the moment they believe no one can see through them. This is the quiet observation that began to surface when a certain investigator spent years studying one of the most honest environments in human society, an environment stripped of romance, stripped of illusions, stripped of the polite lies people use to disguise their motives. A marketplace of intimacy, not love, not connection, just raw negotiation between desire and access. 500 women, 500 observers of male behavior. Women who watched men when masks fell away. Women who saw men when they stopped performing morality and began pursuing appetite. What they revealed was not shocking. It was something far worse. It was consistent. Patterns began to emerge with disturbing clarity. Men believed they were mysterious. They believed they were strategic. They believed their motives were hidden behind confidence, charm, humor, or restraint. But the women watching them saw something else entirely. Repetition. Men repeated themselves. Their words changed. Their clothes changed. Their professions changed. Their ages changed. But their psychological patterns remained almost identical. And once a pattern repeats enough times, it stops being personality. It becomes structure. This structure is not something most men ever notice in themselves, because it hides behind emotions they trust. Desire, loneliness, validation, curiosity, power. These emotions feel personal. They feel spontaneous. They feel authentic. But underneath them sits something much colder, a mechanism. And that mechanism operates the same way in thousands of men who believe they are completely unique. The first pattern is almost invisible unless you watch carefully. Men reveal their weakness in the way they approach what they desire. Not in the desire itself, but in the urgency. Urgency is the first crack in psychological armor. When a man wants something badly enough, his mind stops thinking in strategy and begins thinking in relief. He no longer pursues the outcome that protects his position. He pursues the outcome that quiets his tension. And the moment tension becomes the dominant force in a decision, the person controlling that tension controls the man. This is the first discovery. Desire does not empower men. Uncontrolled desire exposes them. Most men believe desire makes them bold. They believe it gives them courage. They believe it drives conquest. But from the outside, it does something very different. It simplifies them. A man under the influence of desire becomes narrower in thought. His range of possible actions shrinks. His judgment weakens. He stops observing. He stops questioning. He stops calculating. He begins hoping. Hope is one of the most exploitable psychological states in human behavior, because hope replaces evidence. When a man hopes for a certain outcome, he begins ignoring information that contradicts it. And the women observing these men saw the same shift again and again. The moment a man believed he was close to receiving what he wanted, he became easier to guide, easier to delay, easier to manipulate, easier to read. This was not about intelligence. Some of these men were wealthy, some were powerful, some were highly educated. But power in society does not automatically produce awareness. In private environments, the mind that negotiates business deals can still collapse. Under the pressure of personal craving, and this is where the second pattern appeared, men believe secrecy protects them. In reality, secrecy often reveals them. When a man enters a place where he believes his behavior will remain hidden from his public life, his restraint dissolves. He stops managing his image. And when image disappears, instinct becomes visible. This is when the real personality emerges. Not the version designed for colleagues, family, or reputation, but the version shaped by appetite and insecurity. Some men suddenly become generous. Others become controlling. Some become talkative, others become strangely submissive. Each reaction reveals the structure beneath their public identity. Because when men feel safe from judgment, they begin revealing the private negotiations happening inside their minds. They reveal how much validation they need, how much control they crave, how much loneliness they carry, and most importantly, how easily these things can be influenced. The women watching these men did not need complicated strategies. They did not need elaborate manipulation. They simply watched long enough to notice the pattern. Every man begins with resistance, a small layer of caution, a thin barrier of self-respect. But once he begins investing attention, time, or emotion into the interaction, that resistance weakens. Because humans instinctively protect what they have already invested in, even if that investment is irrational. This is one of the oldest psychological traps in human behavior. The more a man gives, the harder it becomes for him to walk away. Not because he is satisfied, but because leaving would force him to confront the possibility that his investment was foolish. And most people will tolerate discomfort longer than they will tolerate embarrassment. So they continue. They rationalize. They negotiate with themselves. And with each step forward, their ability to reverse direction weakens. This is how predictability forms. Not through stupidity, through commitment. The moment a person becomes committed to a desired outcome, their behavior becomes easier to forecast. They will protect the path they have already chosen, even when it begins to harm them, even when the evidence becomes obvious, even when part of their mind quietly recognizes the trap. This is not weakness exclusive to men, but the study revealed something particular about male psychology. Men often mistake persistence for strength. They believe refusing to withdraw proves dominance. But persistence without control becomes dependency, and dependency is the most exploitable position in any power dynamic. Once dependency forms, the balance shifts. The person who needs less begins controlling the interaction, not through aggression, not through threats, but through indifference. Indifference is one of the most powerful psychological tools in human relationships, because the human mind instinctively tries to regain the attention it feels slipping away. And when someone senses indifference from the person they desire, they begin increasing their effort. More attention, more generosity, more vulnerability. The observer sees a man trying harder, but the strategist sees something else. Leverage. This is the third pattern. Men rarely notice the moment the power dynamic changes. They believe they are still pursuing, but pursuit slowly becomes negotiation, and negotiation slowly becomes submission. Not physical submission, psychological submission. The willingness to adjust behavior in order to maintain access. And once a man begins adjusting himself to maintain access to someone else, the structure of control becomes clear. He is no longer directing the interaction. He is responding to it, reacting, waiting, hoping. The women observing this process did not need complex theories. They simply recognized the signals, the shift in tone, the change in patience, the subtle increase in generosity. Every adjustment told the same story. The man was becoming predictable because his motivation was now visible, and visible motivation can always be influenced. What disturbed the investigator most was not the manipulation itself. It was how rarely the men noticed it happening. Even intelligent men, even experienced men, they believed they were navigating the situation carefully. They believed they were maintaining control. But control requires emotional distance, and emotional distance disappears the moment desire becomes stronger than observation. This is the quiet paradox of power. People who believe they are powerful often stop watching for traps. They assume their experience protects them, but experience only protects those who remain suspicious of their own impulses, and most men are not suspicious of their impulses. They trust them. They believe their desires are honest signals, but honesty does not equal accuracy. Desire does not always guide a person toward advantage. Often, it guides them toward exposure, because desire narrows perception. And when perception narrows, manipulation becomes simple. The investigator did not need advanced psychological instruments. He only needed patience. The patterns repeated too consistently to ignore. Men arrived confident. Men became invested. Men became hopeful. Men became predictable. And once predictability appears, control quietly follows. This realization led to a darker understanding of human behavior. Most people do not lose power because someone stronger defeats them. They lose power because their own desires reveal the path to controlling them. And the world is full of observers who quietly watch for that path. They are not loud. They are not aggressive. They simply wait for the moment a person begins revealing what they cannot resist. Because every human being has something they cannot resist. And the moment that weakness becomes visible, the game changes. The investigator eventually wrote a note that summarized the entire observation in a single sentence. It was not dramatic. It was not philosophical. It was simply precise. Men do not become predictable when they are weak. They become predictable when they want something too much. And once someone understands what a man wants badly enough, they no longer need to guess what he will do next. They already know. The first realization was disturbing enough. Men were predictable. But the deeper discovery was even more unsettling. Predictability did not come from weakness. It came from belief. A belief so deeply embedded in male psychology that most men never question it. The belief that they are the ones in control of the interaction. This illusion of control is one of the most powerful psychological narcotics in human behavior. It allows a man to enter environments of negotiation, desire, and emotional exchange while assuming that he is the strategist. But what the observer began to notice was that control rarely belongs to the person who believes they have it. Control belongs to the person who needs the outcome less. This single imbalance explains far more about human power dynamics than most people are comfortable admitting. When a man enters an interaction driven by strong desire, he begins with a subtle disadvantage, not because desire is inherently weak, but because desire introduces urgency. Urgency accelerates decisions, and accelerated decisions rarely allow the mind enough time to observe what is actually happening. The mind under urgency does something peculiar. It begins constructing narratives. These narratives feel like intuition, but they are not intuition, they're justification. A man begins interpreting small gestures as signals of progress. A smile becomes interest, a pause becomes mystery, a delay becomes a test. The mind fills in the gaps with optimism because optimism reduces tension. And tension is something the human brain constantly tries to resolve. This is where manipulation quietly enters the interaction, not through force, not through deception in the dramatic sense, but through timing. The women observing these patterns understood something instinctively. They understood that men measure progress emotionally, not logically. A small increase in attention from the person they desire feels like advancement. A brief withdrawal feels like a challenge, and challenges activate a very specific mechanism inside the male mind: competition. Once competition is triggered, the interaction stops being about desire alone. It becomes about proving capability. This is a dangerous shift, because when a man begins proving something, he stops measuring the cost. He focuses only on winning. And the moment the interaction becomes a contest inside his mind, his decisions become easier to guide. All that is required is a careful balance between reward and uncertainty. Too much reward ends the game. Too much uncertainty causes withdrawal. But the space between the two creates tension, and tension is addictive. Human psychology is wired to pursue resolution. When a person feels they are close to achieving something meaningful, they increase their investment. More time, more attention, more effort, and each additional investment strengthens the illusion that success is near. But the real mechanism operating beneath the surface is much colder. The man is not chasing the person anymore. He is chasing the emotional relief that will come from resolution. Relief from uncertainty, relief from anticipation, relief from the quiet anxiety that began forming the moment he started caring. about the outcome. And once a person is chasing emotional relief, they become highly predictable. This is where the observer began noticing the most revealing transformation. Men who initially appeared calm and self-controlled slowly began exposing their internal structure. Their patience shortened. Their reactions became sharper. Their attention narrowed entirely toward the person controlling the interaction. Outside concerns faded. Work became secondary. Logic became negotiable. And in this state, the most intelligent individuals often behaved with the least awareness, because intelligence does not automatically protect a person from emotional momentum. In fact, intelligence often makes the situation worse. An intelligent mind can generate endless rationalizations for continuing a path that should have been abandoned. It can transform obvious manipulation into perceived complexity. It can convince itself that persistence will eventually unlock the reward. But from the outside, the pattern looks almost mechanical. A man invests attention. The attention increases attachment. Attachment increases expectation. Expectation increases vulnerability. And vulnerability creates leverage. The most interesting detail the investigator discovered was how rarely men recognized this process while it was happening. Not because they lacked awareness in general, but because awareness requires emotional distance. And emotional distance is the first thing desire removes. Once a man begins imagining the outcome he wants, his perception changes. He no longer sees the interaction as it is. He sees it as it could become. Possibility becomes more powerful than evidence, and when possibility dominates perception, the mind becomes easier to guide. This is why certain interactions feel intoxicating to men even when they are objectively inefficient. The uncertainty itself becomes stimulating. Each small signal of progress produces a brief surge of satisfaction, but that satisfaction fades quickly, which forces the man to seek another signal, another confirmation, another small victory. And slowly, without noticing, he becomes dependent on those signals. The person controlling the signals now controls the emotional rhythm of the interaction. Reward, pause, attention, distance, hope, delay. This rhythm is not accidental. It is the quiet architecture of psychological influence. What disturbed the investigator most was how ancient this pattern seemed to be. The structure appeared everywhere once he started looking. In relationships, in negotiations, in politics, in markets, humans repeatedly place themselves in positions where they begin pursuing outcomes that slowly erode their objectivity. They become invested, and the more invested they become, the harder it is for them to recognize manipulation, because recognizing manipulation would require them to accept something uncomfortable, that their judgment failed, and most people protect their ego more aggressively than they protect their advantage. This realization led the investigator to revisit the writings of one of history's most misunderstood observers of power, Niccolo Machiavelli. Machiavelli understood something about human nature that many modern interpretations soften or ignore. People rarely fall because they are attacked. They fall because they misjudge the structure of the situation they are entering. They assume loyalty where there is interest. They assume honesty where there is negotiation. They assume stability where there is constant competition for advantage. But most importantly, they assume that their own motivations are invisible. This assumption is catastrophic because human motivations are rarely hidden from experienced observers. They reveal themselves through behavior, through patience, through what a person tolerates, through what they continue pursuing even when the cost increases. The women who participated in the study were not scholars. They did not analyze human behavior with philosophical language, but they understood instinctively what many theorists spend decades trying to articulate. Desire speaks, not through words, through persistence, through urgency, through the quiet adjustments a man makes in order to stay close to the outcome he wants. Every adjustment is a signal, and signals reveal structure. Once someone understands the structure of your desire, they no longer need to manipulate aggressively. They simply guide the environment in ways that encourage you to continue revealing yourself, and most men reveal far more than they realize. They reveal how badly they want validation. They reveal how easily they become competitive. They reveal how strongly they react to perceived rejection, and perhaps most revealing of all, they reveal how uncomfortable they are with walking away. Walking away requires emotional discipline. It requires the ability to abandon an investment. It requires accepting that the time, attention, and energy already spent may never produce the reward imagined at the beginning. Many men cannot tolerate this realization, so they continue. They persist. They convince themselves that persistence proves strength. But from the outside, persistence often signals something else entirely: attachment. And attachment is the moment power quietly shifts, because the person who is willing to walk away always holds more control than the person who cannot. This principle appears everywhere in human conflict. In negotiations, the side that can leave the table has leverage. In relationships, the person less dependent on the outcome dictates the emotional rhythm. In power struggles, the individual who remains calm while others become invested often wins, without appearing to compete at all. This is why Machiavelli placed such emphasis on emotional discipline, not because emotions are weakness, but because emotions reveal motivation, and revealed motivation creates vulnerability. The investigator eventually realized something even darker. The study of 500 women had not revealed a secret about men alone. It had revealed a universal law of human behavior. People become predictable the moment they want something strongly enough. It does not matter whether the desire is affection, power, status, validation, or security. The structure remains the same. Desire narrows perception. Narrow perception increases investment. Investment increases vulnerability. And vulnerability creates control. But here's the detail most people miss. The person who gains control often does not need to use it aggressively, because once someone becomes predictable, influence becomes effortless. You do not need to force predictable people. You simply allow them to continue following the path their own desire has already created, and they will walk it willingly, often believing it was their decision all along. The investigator wrote another note near the end of his observations. It was colder than the first. It said something very simple. The easiest people to control are not the weakest. They are the most hopeful, because hope convinces them the outcome they desire is just one step away. And a man who believes he is one step away from getting what he wants will take almost any step you place in front of him. For a long time, people believed that power belonged to the strongest man in the room, the loudest voice, the most confident posture, the one who seemed impossible to shake. But power rarely reveals itself that way. Real power hides in something far quieter: control over one's own impulses. The study of hundreds of men did not uncover a mystery about desire, or weakness, or morality. It revealed something far more fundamental about human nature. Most people do not lose control of their lives because someone outsmarts them. They lose control because they expose themselves, not deliberately, not consciously, but through the small repeated signals of what they cannot resist. Every human being carries something they want badly enough to bend for. Validation, attention, status, intimacy, recognition. These desires are not flaws. They are part of being human. But the moment desire begins directing your decisions instead of informing them, the structure of control quietly shifts. Because once someone understands what you cannot walk away from, they no longer need to confront you. They only need to position themselves between you and the thing you want. And from that moment forward, you will begin negotiating with them, even if you believe you are still in control. This is the quiet truth the observer eventually understood. The women in the study were not simply watching men behave badly or foolishly. They were witnessing a universal pattern that appears everywhere human desire exists. In relationships, in politics, in business, in every place where people want something from each other. The pattern never changes. The person who becomes emotionally invested first becomes easier to influence. The person who begins chasing validation slowly gives away their leverage. And the person who cannot tolerate uncertainty becomes predictable, not weak, predictable. This is why the most dangerous individuals in any power dynamic are rarely the most aggressive ones. They're the most patient. They watch, they listen. They wait for the moment someone reveals what they cannot let go of. And when that moment arrives, they do nothing dramatic. They simply adjust the environment around that desire. A small delay here, a small reward there, a hint of progress, a moment of distance, and the person pursuing the outcome begins doing the rest of the work for them, step by step, believing they are moving closer to what they want, rarely noticing how much of themselves they are slowly surrendering along the way. This is not a story about manipulation alone. It is a story about awareness, because once you understand this structure, the entire landscape of human behavior begins to look different. You start noticing how often people reveal their priorities through persistence. You begin seeing how easily desire turns confidence into dependency, and you realize that the strongest position in any interaction is not dominance, it is independence. The ability to walk away, the ability to remain calm while others become emotionally invested, the ability to observe your own desires before acting on them. This kind of discipline is rare, not because it is impossible, but because most people prefer the comfort of believing they are in control, rather than examining. The impulse is guiding their decisions, but the observer eventually reached a final realization that reframed everything he had seen. The patterns he discovered were not designed to humiliate men. They were designed to reveal something about all human beings. Everyone becomes predictable somewhere. Everyone has a desire strong enough to narrow their perception. Everyone has a moment where hope becomes stronger than judgment, and that moment is where power quietly changes hands. The lesson hidden inside these observations is not about becoming cold or detached from life. It is about becoming aware of the silent negotiations happening beneath every interaction. The negotiations between patience and urgency, between independence and attachment, between observation and impulse. Because once you begin recognizing these forces inside yourself, something unusual happens. The world slows down. You stop reacting immediately. You stop chasing signals. You start watching patterns. And when you watch long enough, you begin noticing something that most people never see. The people who appear the most confident are often the most invested. The people who speak the loudest about control are often the ones quietly hoping for validation. And the people who seem impossible to influence usually have a desire they are trying very hard to hide. But the rare individual who understands his own desires, who can observe them without becoming enslaved by them, who can walk away even when the outcome feels close, that person becomes difficult to predict, difficult to guide, difficult to control. And in a world where most people reveal themselves through what they chase, the man who understands what he must never chase too desperately becomes something far more powerful than he appears. He becomes invisible to manipulation, not because he lacks desire, but because he refuses to let desire make his decisions for him. And once you reach that point, a strange shift happens. You begin seeing the same patterns everywhere. People rushing, people proving, people hoping, people slowly revealing the one thing they cannot resist. And you realize something quietly unsettling. The game never really changed. Only your awareness of it did. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you liked the video, and please subscribe to this channel. Have a great day.